Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Back Lot Banter's new premiere box office wrap-up analysis show, Back Lot Banter. You know, the name's so nice, we had to say it twice. I'm your
Oh
host,
yeah.
Tanner Dykstra. I'm joined by my fellow box office expert, Tucker Hazel.
Hey, how's
We're
it going?
here, as I said, first episode. Very excited to share this show with you. Very excited to discover it along with you, the viewer. If you want to talk box office with us, if you want to talk movies with us, if you want to talk anything with us, make sure to join that Discord. That link is in the description. Like this video, comment on anything that we bring up in this video, because we have lots of information for you coming
Oh,
up
yeah.
in this summer box office analysis.
Yes.
Which
Extravaganza. That's what
exactly,
they're calling it.
yeah, I would call it that for sure. Now we have a multitude of visual aspects to show you, to a visual treat for the eyes and the ears, as you get to hear our sweet tonerous breakdown of all these various things. So without further ado, Tucker, shall we dive right in?
Yeah, let's dive right into where the sort of overall best place to start a recap of the summer movie season. Of course, I just want to make sure that everyone knows, going forward, this will be a monthly show. We will not be doing a seasonal look back. So this won't be every 3 months, but we'll be recapping each month in review as it happens. But we wanted to talk about everything that happened this summer because, well, August, this last month that has happened, was certainly interesting to talk about. Most of the meat of this year lies within this past summer movie season. And guess what? First off, we've got our top 10 2022 domestic box office performers, led by none other than Top Gun Maverick, just cracking the 700 million domestic mark, which means that it has surpassed Black Panther as number 5 all-time box office grosser, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it really is fantastic. I mean, this is something that has been said time and time again about Top Gun Maverick, but it's incredible. It's nothing short of, inexplicable, the success that this movie has seen, quite frankly. And I love it. I love that we had that, something so bold and, a revival, a good movie, a revival for action cinema, a vehicle for nearly 60-year-old Tom Cruise here, as like proving that he is still a paragon of action cinema and a big time box office draw for
Absolutely.
Many different demographics of people.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing about the rest of this top 10 is that it's sort of a balance between original films and a lot of franchise films, which is what you usually see out of that top 10. But number 2, we've got Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, sitting at almost half that with 411 domestic. Jurassic World Dominion at 375 million. Minions: The Rise of Gru in the long-running and very highly lucrative Despicable Miniverse, the Miniverse. And Thor: Love and Thunder, the latest entry in the MCU, at 340.
Yes.
And then for the rest of it, these are not mostly franchise films, with Elvis at 149 at number 6. Number 7, we have Nope at 120 million. And number 8, we've got Lightyear at 118 million. Number 9, we have The Black Phone at 89 million. And number 10 with Bullet Train at 87 million. And only one of those comes from a franchise. Elvis, I guess you'd say, is the franchise of life.
Yes.
Baby. But,
franchise
but
of
Nope,
history.
Black Phone, Bullet Train, Elvis, all of these are original films. And that's very exciting to see a lot of the top 10, not most, but a lot of the top 10 made up of non-franchise films.
I would agree. It warms the deep, cold, cynical cackles of my heart to see that, maybe it isn't all sequels and franchises all the way down after all. But, of course, Tucker, as we will see with our next little graphic here, that, maybe breaking into that top 10 doesn't always bode well for the overall box office or the overall outcome of a film when you really compare it with the budget that it had. I do want to quickly shout out, though, all of the beautiful graphics that you will be laying thine eyes upon in this film were created by yours truly, Tucker Hazel. So sound off for him in the comments, in the Discord, on his fantastic work on this stuff here. Yeah, send him a letter.
Snail mail?
We'll set up a P.O. box or something, I'm sure.
I don't even know how to do that. I'm going to have to Google that.
Let's move on to that.
I spent like 7-8 hours working on this today, but I'm very proud of it. And it was worth absolutely worth it.
As he should be.
But next slide was the first graphic that I made using Canva, which is not what the rest of these are going to be. These are mostly Google slides. But we've got the top worldwide grossing domestic movies. Now, what this means for Summer 22, what this means is that I've taken the budget for the film, and I've compared it to its total worldwide gross. And what that'll allow you to see, where the light blue passes this green line, is where the film becomes profitable. Now, the estimated sort of general consensus is that if a movie makes twice its production budget, which is what that green line indicates, then the film is on track to be making money back for its studio, and will certainly not be losing money at that point. Of course, there's cuts of the theaters. There's all different things to factor in. Different amounts of money come from different box offices across the globe, but it's a good indicator that line is sort of the tipping point between failure and success. So what you'll see here is that really only 5 movies from this year, or at least from the summer movie season, have really gone above and beyond in terms of making a heck of a lot of dough. And they are the top 5, as we saw earlier. All of them being franchise films. 2 of them MCU, 2 other sequels, a Legacy sequel, Jurassic World Dominion, of course, Minions Rise of Gru. But down the line, even some of these less successful films in terms of total box office have made their money back. Yeah. And that's a good sign, as we'll get into the specifics of each of these movies as we go down the rest of this adventure with you. But you'll notice that there are still a couple of big movies from this summer that did not quite make the cut, namely DC League of Super Pets, which still might have a bit of legs, but probably won't end up being profitable for Warner Brothers. And unfortunately, Lightyear, sitting at way below its budget. Yeah.
That's the big one I wanted to point out here, being, because as you said, our top 5 from the previous graphic all have made their money back quite graciously, in fact.
Yes.
Elvis in that group as well. But Lightyear, if you look there, well below making that money back. Very unfortunate stuff there for Pixar.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that a bit more in depth when we get to it in due time, dear viewer. But Chuck, shall we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the film that kicked off the summer movie season in a lot of ways, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. As you can see, all sorts of brilliant little tidbits and numbers for you here for you to soak in with your beautiful eyes, the windows to your soul.
Yes.
And up top we got the total worldwide gross, correct, Tucker? Yes. $955 million. Nearly breaking into that billion category, but 50 million off. That's a fair chunk of change to a billion, but hey, whatever. An important note there, which would have pushed it over, is that no opening in China. It was a big detriment that certainly would have gone over a billion if Doctor Strange did open in China. Yeah. And then you also have some comparisons to other MCU films. 11th highest grossing MCU film, 7th highest MCU opening weekend. So all interesting stuff there. And the comparison to the previous Doctor Strange. The only interesting takeaway I really thought there, or the big thing I took away there, was how really the MCU has grown in terms of Doctor Strange being a draw of a character now. A good box office turning there from the 2016 Doctor Strange, but really just blown out of the water by its sequel a couple years down the line, and Doctor Strange being a bigger MCU character draw now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do want to draw in a little bit more on certain aspects of this release, because it's interesting for a few reasons. It not only has the MCU grown, but this film actually, to me, kind of proves that Doctor Strange isn't the box office draw.
Okay.
The reason this movie is positioned as it is in terms of 11th highest grossing MCU movie, 7th highest opening, and cracking almost to that billion, is because this really was positioned as an event movie. And I think that the sort of disconnect that personally I felt between my expectations of this film and what it was in reality is, I think, why this film is actually worse received across the board, except for the box office, compared to that 2016 original. If you look at the Rotten Tomatoes, this is 15 points lower on Rotten Tomatoes. It's half a point lower on IMDb. It's got a B+ as opposed to an A cinema score, which, for those of you who don't know, cinema score, they take the thoughts of people who have just walked out of the theater and they ask them what they think of it.
Immediately walking out of the theater.
And what that really reflects is how well did this film meet their expectations. And you want an A. So a B plus is fine, but if it's not an A, most MCU movies get A's. There's maybe something a little bit wrong in terms of an indicator. And the no opening in China is easily why this film didn't make $1 billion, but I actually just still do not think that it's Doctor Strange that is the draw of this. It is the multiversal aspect of it and the sort of promise and tease of cameos that I think led to this movie being as big as it is.
Sure, yeah, I could see that. I just think that, maybe people are familiar with the character. People aren't going to this because they're like, oh my god, the new Doctor Strange movie. It's the new MCU movie. Doctor Strange is a character I recognize.
Yes.
Maybe where that wasn't the case with the first Doctor Strange movie,
Sure,
where they're like, who's Doctor Strange? It's another MCU character, I guess. Or another Marvel character.
Yeah.
I don't see.
Didn't they mention him in Winter Soldier?
Yeah, what the hell's going on here? But yeah, that's certainly you raised a couple good points there.
Yeah. And if we want to move on to the real golden goose of this summer, we've got Top Gun Maverick.
Goose.
Golden Rooster, some might say. But man, this movie just has statistics out the wazoo.
Yes.
And factoids and giblets. And I think really the reason that this movie is so impressive to us is not only, of course, it is one of the highest grossing movies of all time, but it's because it's gotten that total gross over a long period of time. Even comparing this movie to some of the other top grossing movies of recent times, like Avengers Endgame, Infinity War, Force Awakens, or No Way Home, this movie has had a longer run in the box office, in theaters, and has been continually picking up solid chunks of change, way more so than even your other top high grossing movies, because it wasn't as front loaded as the other ones. If you look at something like Avengers Endgame, that movie brought in $1 billion on its first day.
Yeah.
It sold out all tickets across the entire country. And then, of course, it passed $2 billion, but that was over a much shorter amount of time than this film has been in theaters for 3 or 4 months at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Tucker, you bring up a good point about how it's been consistently getting good chunks of change, thanks to the fantastic marketing campaigning, continuous marketing campaign.
Yeah.
That Paramount has been running on this thing. The Fan Appreciation Weekend, which happened just a couple weeks ago,
which I have mentioned here that because of that, it was able to return to number 1 in its 15th week, Fan Appreciation Weekend brought it up to number 2 at the box office in week 12.
Yes.
Insane.
Yes.
And it was recently brought back up to number 1 in its 15th week.
Labor Day weekend market. I saw that at least our local theater chain is doing a Spanish dub release as well, which is very interesting. So yeah, they are really just sort of, finding different ways to package Top Gun Maverick just to push it farther and farther above that line, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a couple. I mean, we're recording this on the last day of Labor Day weekend. And just a couple. It released on digital a couple days ago, I think. And it was simultaneously number 1 at the box office and number 1 in the digital market. The first film ever to do such a thing.
Crazy.
Which is just another factoid out the wazoo, as Tucker said.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about this movie, and the reason that I'm sort of reading into it, its continuous cycle of picking up money and building hype over time, is that it's able to build this narrative of marketing the film as this film that's breaking records.
Yes.
Every week, every other week, every couple weeks, it has a new record it's breaking, and boom, they can put out a new ad for YouTube. They can put out a new TV ad that says number 5 highest grossing movie of all time, number 1 at the box office for such a long time. And people are like, oh, interesting, I have to see that. And so it really just hasn't stopped being the draw. And also, it's really one of the few movies this summer that provides a big screen spectacle.
Yeah.
Of course, there are a couple others, which are the top grossing ones, but this movie also has a lot of repeat viewings. You have seen it twice. I wish I saw it twice before it left theaters, unfortunately. But that is another reason. I don't speak Spanish. That's another reason why it just keeps picking up money.
Yeah, I totally agree there as well, Tucker. Another interesting point to bring up here is that they have sort of extended out the physical release of this until
Mm,
November. No doubt, maybe trying to extend the record-setting nature of this,
yeah,
and maybe saying, this movie set X records for physical release purchases
sure.
in November. However many months after its initial release in theaters,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. So yeah, absolutely, the Titan that is Top Gun Maverick. Tom Cruise will live forever in box office history.
Yeah, no, he absolutely will. But I think that this is a interesting late in the career boost for him, and
Hmm.
we'll see if this impacts the performance of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, which
I
comes out
certainly
next
hope
year.
so. Yeah,
Because this is Tom Cruise's highest-grossing film worldwide ever, and this
yeah.
guy's been in films for 40 years, 50 years at this point, and that is crazy. And hopefully, it means that his work with Joseph Kosinski and the writers and the team behind this movie continues to build in terms of a box office revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on, Tucker. Moving on.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the epic conclusion to the Jurassic Park series as well.
Mm-hmm.
The conclusion 165 million years in the making, I think, as they marketed this. Jurassic World Dominion with a total worldwide gross of $994 million. So close to that billion-dollar club, that
Yeah.
seemingly less and less prestigious billion-dollar club.
Yeah.
But
But it
yeah,
wouldn't be very prestigious for movies that came out this year because we only have one in Top
yeah,
Gun Maverick.
yeah,
The only movie that's made it to the billion-dollar club this year, as opposed to before pandemic, I think it was 2019, there was like 7 or 8 movies that made it into the billion-dollar club. So I think that it's possible that this movie cracks that over the next few months. We've got it in very limited release, staying a little longer in other markets across
It's
the
on
globe.
Peacock now.
True. Well,
Yeah.
that basically kills its monetary value here in the U.S. But I think just a few more showings and a couple more weekends, if it picks up half a million there, half a million there, I think it can pass a billion. And I don't know why. I don't care about this movie, but that would be very satisfying to me if it just
Well,
barely eked
it would
over a
fit
billion.
alongside its two predecessors, of
Yes.
course, Jurassic World and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, both of them part of the billion-dollar club.
Yes.
Interesting that Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom made more money than Jurassic World. That was a big deal when that movie came out. Big deal when it made $1 billion all the way back in 2015. But yeah, and yeah, I mean, I didn't too much care for this movie, and it's interesting that it hasn't made that $1 billion, with the fact of this being the legacy sequeliest
Yeah.
of all these legacy sequels, bringing back our legacy characters.
Yeah.
But it didn't really. I mean, it made a good chunk of change here, but hasn't stuck around in the consciousness. Wasn't enough to push it over that $1 billion mark like its two predecessors, which is really interesting. And maybe marks a successful end for the series, but maybe a bit of a quiet whimpering end in so the same breath.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is successful. It is the third highest grossing film of this year. But when you place it into the other context, as you'll see on here, the budget, the Rotten Tomatoes, the IMDb, the cinema score, actually, it's got the same cinema score as Fallen Kingdom, so scratch
Yeah.
that. But this is the lowest rated of any of these films across the board. I didn't compare it to the Jurassic Park trilogy from barely when we were barely alive or before.
Yeah.
But this is the highest budgeted of any of these films, and it also made the least. So I would say that this is not a successful end to the franchise because it made the least, it cost the most to make, and it was the lowest reviewed. And frankly, I just don't think that this movie has any history going forward. It only exists as an end cap, but not because it as a piece of this saga is necessarily interesting in itself.
Yeah. Tucker, shall we move on into a sort of the true sob story of the summer?
Yeah.
Let's move over to, of course, Lightyear. And we brought it up a little bit earlier, but what's really interesting here is this is the second lowest Pixar opening, behind Onward, which is
Yeah.
of course only curtailed by the pandemic. I'm sure that
Yes.
we're all familiar with. But yeah, what Onward came out in early March, I believe, right? And shutdowns happened mid to late March. So
Yeah.
yeah, and this is Buzz Lightyear, voiced by Chris Evans. They position this as a summer blockbuster movie. This was
Yep.
the first Pixar movie back in theaters since Onward, actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
and very much underperformed by Pixar standards.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that it not only underperformed, but it's such a big degree of a failure because this movie cost a buttload to make. 200 million is the budget of Marvel movies. That's same if not more than Top Gun Maverick and Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness, and it made a fraction of what those films made, and it also made a fraction of what every other single entry in the Toy Story franchise has made. If you look down there, we've got the Toy Story 1 coming in at 394 million, Toy Story 2 at 497, and then Toy Story 3 and 4 both almost at the exact same total, worldwide total.
$1 billion pictures.
Yeah, exactly. 1.06 and 1.07 billion dollars. And so across the board, this is the biggest flop in Pixar history. Pixar, the most prestigious animation studio, at least I would say, or at least personally my most favorite, and having it be the second lowest domestic gross for Pixar, for the lowest grossing Toy Story film or Toy Story franchise film, and then lowest across the board in every other category. This is really sad. I mean, if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes, this is the only Toy Story franchise film that has been under 90 million. Not only under 90 million, but under 97. Oh my God, I'm not the millions. Sorry, let me rewind. 97% Rotten Tomatoes is the lowest with Toy Story 4, which, by the way, I love. Great movie, reflected in that Rotten Tomatoes scores. But the lowest being 97, and then we jump down to 75. That's still good, but man, that's so much lower.
Yeah, and you have to ask why. What was it about this film? You know, various theories have been thrown out. Is it that, that over the course of the last 2 years, audiences have been trained to watch Pixar movies on Disney Plus?
Yeah.
Is it a thing of, well, they'll just wait for it to come to Disney Plus? Was it a lack of marketing? I mean, I thought there was a decent marketing push for Lightyear, but maybe not.
That teaser trailer came out a long time ago.
Yeah, but maybe not for the demographics that counted. Who's to say? I mean, I don't really pay any mind or ear to the too woke, go woke, go broke sort of criticisms. I don't think that is a valid criticism for why this movie flopped like it did, but it's certainly an interesting thought experiment, and I wonder how Disney and Pixar will course correct going forward. Will they lean away from, franchise sequel sort of things? Will they lean into their originals, which are much better received, like Turning Red this year is much better received. Luca was much better received. It's even really kind of brought into doubt, is Lightyear going to get into the Best Animated Feature category this year at the Oscars, which would be a huge slap in the face for something of this budget and magnitude.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not exactly sure. I didn't do the research on this, but as far as I can remember, every Pixar film that I know has been nominated for Best Animated. Maybe not Monsters University or Good Dinosaur or something like that, but there's a slot reserved for Pixar, and of course, Turning Red, I have no doubt will make that slot this year. But I don't know if I see them leaning away from these sequels and legacy sequels to things, because almost all of the sequels have made a lot of money. Finding Dory, $1 billion picture. Toy Story 3, Toy Story 4. These movies make a lot of money. Cars 3. Incredibles 2, incredibly successful film. This is kind of the only example of those sequels doing significantly worse than the originals. But also, we're in a very unique place here because, yes, the last 3 movies that they've made since Incredibles 2 have been originals, but we don't know how they would have done at the box office because none of them released theatrically. We have a couple more. Then I think the next 2 films coming out from Pixar are original films. I don't think we actually know anything beyond that. But I would not be surprised if they geared back into this theatrical release and big budget sequel movies again, just to try to recapture some of that energy.
Yeah, I think so. It also could be the odd duck factor is what happened to this, is that it wasn't Toy Story 5.
No.
It was Lightyear, and
It's Toy Story 0.
it's Toy Story 0 in a lot of ways, and it's
Toy
he's
Story
a so it's
Origins.
the true story of the toy, but then Andy saw the movie, and then I don't know, maybe the audiences didn't pay too much mind to that whole
Yeah.
confusing fiasco, but maybe they did, and that's what caused it to flop. Who's to say? Well, we're gonna move on from the Gordian knot that is Lightyear,
Sure.
and on to the Gordian knot that is Baz Luhrmann's Elvis.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Yeah, I mean, talk about take us away with Elvis. Hit us with a couple of these facts here.
Yeah, Elvis is, I think, one of the surprises of the summer. Not because people expected it to do poorly, but because it did so well and was able to crack into the top 10 above movies like the next movie from Jordan Peele, as we'll get to, or The Black Phone. These movies that people know are known quantities. And then Elvis, very long, very flashy, kind of wacky. What the hell's going on? Makes this much money. I had $281 million, and I'm proud of you, Baz Luhrmann. You've done a good job, and I think that the most interesting thing about the position that this film is in is that it is looking to be a very early released frontrunner for Best Actor, or at least nominee, with Austin Butler as the king himself, Elvis Presley.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously, in our thinking back to like how has something like this happened before? We of course compare this to Bohemian Rhapsody from 2018, for which Rami Malek won the Best Actor award, another music biopic here.
Yep.
And looking at I mean, it paid off for Rami Malek. Maybe it could pay off for Austin Butler, but it seems like he's gonna have some pretty steep competition. Having just heard some Brendan Fraser praise coming out
Sure.
of Venice Film Festival.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting here, what caught my eye in doing compiling some research for this, is look at that box office for Bohemian Rhapsody. Just as a quick aside, 910, nearly $1 billion here. A lot of it coming from international. A good chunk of it, in fact. In doing some breakdown of that, a lot from the UK, of course. Freddie Mercury being from the UK, and Japan was a big market for Bohemian Rhapsody as well. But circling back to Elvis, yeah, I'm really happy that this movie did this well because it is so visually interesting. It is an original film from a visionary director. So
Yeah.
I'm very happy for Baz Luhrmann and Austin Butler and everybody involved in the creation of this film.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this film is a success as it is, because you look at Bohemian Rhapsody and that sort of kickstarting interest in these music biopics. We get multiple of them a year now,
Yes.
but none of them have reached that number again.
Yeah.
I just did some quick research. Rocket Man, only 195, and of course that's a good chunk of change for a movie, but that's almost 100 million less than Elvis. So Elvis is kind of reaching that second slot of being a successful, very successful, one of the most successful movies of the summer, music biopic, and also personally one of my favorite movies this summer. So glad it's doing as well as it is.
Yeah. I guess people just had Queen fever back in 2018. I know I did. Moving on. Moving on.
It's sweeping the nation.
It's sweet. Well, it
Get
had
your
swept the
vaccine.
it swept the nation a couple years ago. Anyway, Thor: Love and Thunder, the other MCU entry from this summer, did also very, very well here. We had a $750 million worldwide gross. You can see it compared to the other Thor films, the second highest grossing Thor movie, behind Thor Ragnarok there, by the way. And no opening in China for this one as well. As you can see, though, I would noted that Ragnarok made 20% of its international gross there.
Yeah.
Thor: Love and Thunder missing out on that change from overseas in China.
Yeah, and I think that really is the deciding factor here for both of these Marvel movies that we've seen this year. And I don't actually remember if the 2021 Marvel movies were not released in China. I think that might have been true. But the fact that this movie didn't make it the 850 million that Ragnarok did, I think is mostly because of China again.
Yeah.
And this movie also, across the board, less well received than Ragnarok. If you look at that Rotten Tomatoes, it's 65 compared to 77, 6.7 IMDb compared to 7.0, and a B plus again on all those B cinema scores here for Thor: Love and Thunder, just not quite being what people were hoping for. Of course, that's not necessarily true for everyone. I love that movie. It's easily my favorite Thor movie. But just because it isn't the success story of Ragnarok, and just because it doesn't hit that $1 billion club, that doesn't mean that it's not a successful film. I mean,
No,
15th
very
highest
successful.
growing MCU movie, number 30 highest grossing domestic opening with 144 million. So these are still good numbers, but they're just not quite the growth that I think the producers over at Disney and Marvel Studios are hoping for.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, but yeah, still very successful overall, and a good showing from Marvel in the summer season, I think as well. You know, people levying concerns that Phase 4 is showing Marvel, you know, cracking a bit at the seams here with their
Hmm.
movie performance, and I think it can be attributed largely to both films skipping a Chinese release.
Yeah.
But and obviously that is reportedly for LGBTQ content reasons, and
Mm.
I'd rather Marvel, you know, make a stance of including those things and not releasing their films in China
Yeah.
than sort of bending the knee
Yeah.
to the mores over there. But
Hmm.
enough of that. Let's go to
Well, actually, the last thing I want to
oh,
mention,
sorry,
hold on,
go
before
okay.
we go on, I think the success story of this film, I think, is very much hindered by that budget. You got to look at that budget,
Yeah.
$250 million. If you look at that first graph, if you want to go back and look at the first graph that I
Hmm.
made, comparing all of these films and doubling their budget, this film was the closest out of those top five to not making back as much. Of course, it did, but 250 million is way more than anything else released this year, and it's interesting that you kind of don't feel that when you're watching the movie. You kind
It's
of
got
don't
to be
feel
the
it costing 70 million more dollars than Ragnarok.
Yeah, it's got to be the pandemic delays and the pandemic ballooning out that budget,
Yeah.
putting pauses on filming, you know, COVID regulations and things of that nature, ballooning out that budget a little bit. Moving on again to Minions: The Rise of Gru. How about this film here? $890 million worldwide gross. You can see it compared to the other Despicable Me films there. It's coming in under the original, or not the original, but the Minions from 2015, a $1.1 billion picture. That one was. This one got a late China release, released in China on August 19th, and has been chugging along ever since, picking up good chunks of change in that international market.
Yeah, and I think that this is a movie that will stick around more. Of course, we're talking about this as the most current numbers that we have, but I see this movie easily passing 900, but I think floating around somewhere the 950, 940 a million dollar mark, which is good. And I think that the interesting thing about this is you can't say that this didn't make the money that Minions and Despicable Me 3 did because of China, because it has a release date in China, and will continue to pick up money there, and it'll play a very long tail in all those other markets. But I think the thing that is pushing back against this is still that lack of box office growth recovering from being dead for ostensibly a year and a half,
Yeah.
with 2022 and in the early parts of 2021. The box office still has not gotten back to what it was, and it was at full swing in 2015 to 2018-19, which is when Minions and Despicable Me 3 both broke into the $1 billion club. So this movie is doing well. I think it's easily one of the highest grossing movies since the pandemic released, but I attribute its lack of same level of growth or gross to being released after the box office.
Yes, and has
The
proven
box office. The pandemic happened.
it has Minions: The Rise of Gru has proven to be the dominant movie to take your kids to, as
Yeah.
we can see if we move into the other animated ventures that summer has to offer. The Bob's
Yeah.
Burgers movie, not really a kid-friendly thing. You know, it's based on an adult animation. Then you got the other two big contenders. Well, big contenders as I list off: Paws of Fury: The Legend of Hank with a measly $23 million
Yeah.
gross, and
Barely half its budget.
you know, a fine turning out from DC League of Super Pets with a 161 gross on a 90 million budget.
Yeah, and that movie still is making money currently. It is doing fine, but it's not playing like superhero movies do, and it's not playing like animated movies
Yeah.
do, which is a very interesting convergence of factors. Because frankly, I think this movie, if it had been positioned correctly, could have been big business. I mean, it would have had to been released at a farther away from Minions, because was eating its lunch even when it came out, and still is
Yeah.
to this day. And it also should have been pushed a little harder as the only DC movie, or the first DC movie in a long time. And this is the first DC movie that we got this year, and it's the only one until October with Black Adam. But they didn't push it as that, and because of that, it doesn't really fit into either very successful camps.
Yeah. I still can't believe there's got to be some sort of DC executive over there at Warner Brothers kicking themselves, asking, why didn't we just make an animated Justice League movie?
Yeah.
Why didn't we do that? That would have cleaned house at the box office.
Absolutely.
But nay, we have to use most of our budget on hiring Dwayne the Rock Johnson and Kevin Hart,
Yep.
and then making a smattering of forgettable animal characters.
Yep.
But who am I to judge? It's underperforming. Hey,
You're a critic.
I'm
That's
a critic.
who you are to judge.
I guess so.
Next on the docket, we have something that is less disappointing than these animated films that have so plagued us the last few months. But we've got Jordan Peele's Nope, the third film from a filmmaker that just seems to never miss. But this time he's not missed, but he's certainly hit the ball a little lower than he has been. And I think that that's kind of the narrative around Nope here, is if you look at all these statistics across the board, we have the total here for Nope compared to the 45-day domestic gross for Us and Get Out, which was the closest comparison that I could get for both of them. And it's lowballing quite a bit here, 40, 50 million below in terms of comparing it to the domestic up at the top. And it's also the lowest in Rotten Tomatoes. It's the lowest in no, it's not the lowest in IMDb. Us is a little bit lower, but unfortunately Nope just isn't the success that I'm sure Jordan Peele and everyone involved wanted it to be, especially because if you look at that budget, it is it's over three times more than his second highest budgeted film.
Yes, and has grossed less than both of his previous films, which is very unfortunate for Mr. Peele, of course, because I love Nope. And it was very much positioned, again, to be his biggest film yet, his summer blockbustiest film yet. And I guess the audience really, I mean, it made good money, but the audience just couldn't go for it as much as his previous two films, I guess. Which is interesting, considering the cast he got for this, considering the scale he got for this, considering the trailers, which were fantastic for this, the great marketing push that they put out for Nope. Just couldn't reel in those people. Maybe it was a rated R sort of curse that that was hovering over this film like a cloud, maybe, if you will. But
Though, that doesn't mean that it's all doom and gloom, it's all clouds in the sky, because this was, Nope did have the highest opening for an original film since Us in 2019. Excuse me. Of course, lots of time there where movies weren't coming out and movies weren't doing well, and really the only exceptions to that are the franchise films, like Fast and Furious, like the MCU movies, Jurassic World Dominion, Minions, stuff like that. But having it be this sort of nice gap that bookends 2019 to 2022, the highest openings for original films, that's kind of fun.
Yeah, and I think it really just sort of seals Jordan Peele as this like paragon of original filmmaking.
Yeah.
If he is consistently beating his own record, which is sort of interesting. But of course, Tucker, as you said, there was a good chunk of time where movies weren't coming out, original films weren't coming out, and of course, as you know, streaming is the place that'll save all sorts of films in that scenario. So let's look over at the streaming movies that some big streaming releases that happened over the course of the summer. Those being Netflix's The Gray Man, Hulu's Prey, and Amazon Prime Video's 13 Lives.
Yep.
And a variance of success and reception to these things here. The Gray Man is, from the Russo brothers, who did Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, some other MCU movies you might have heard of.
And of course, Cherry.
And of course, Cherry.
Apple TV Plus's Cherry.
But this is their foray back into big budget action filmmaking. A $200 million film, I believe The Gray Man was. Big price tag on this one. And spent 8 days in Netflix's #1 spot. Again, it's hard to gauge how successful these things really are on our side of things. Only the big wigs over at the streaming companies really know how these things did. But they must have been confident in it because The Gray Man is getting a spin-off, a sequel and a spin-off series, correct? Or
I don't know
spin-off
if it's a
film.
series, but
A spin-off film, I'm sure. And yeah, number one Netflix film of the year. Number four of all time. Couldn't crack the success of Red Notice
yeah.
from last year. But hey, what can these days? You know what I mean?
True, yeah, but we don't know exactly what these numbers mean, or really even what number four Netflix film of all time actually means.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting about this film is that it is from these big name directors. It apparently did well enough for them that they want to continue their partnership with the Russo brothers. But it also got a very limited theatrical release, which is
Yes.
where the two of us and our friend Abram were able to see it. And I think that's the number one reason why I put it on here. Of course, very expensive film, but that it got a Netflix or a theatrical release at all is incredibly uncommon for Netflix original films. So interesting from that regard. But the more clear success story from the last few months on streaming is the next entry in the Predator series, Prey, which is a movie that we don't have the same kind of statistics for because Hulu is a little more
They play close to the chest. Yes.
Yeah, they hide in the corners with their facts and statistics, but it was their number one all time premiere. And also just sort of anecdotally, this is easily the streaming movie I heard the most about this summer. Trending on Twitter, very popular on Letterboxd, very highly rated across the board, and sort of an interesting return to form, and sort of a place where you're like, hey, this could have been a theatrical release.
Yeah.
And I think it would have done really well. And that's something that's a little bit disappointing about these streaming movies. I think streaming movies are better than they've ever been now with three good movies here, good to great movies. But they're also taking away from the variety in the box office. Because yes, Prey is a franchise film. Yes, it is an action film. But having a movie of this quality and different kind of franchise on the big screen, I think it would have added a lot to the doldrums of August, as we'll certainly get to.
Yes, and a film that's maybe suffered quite a bit from the streaming release and from the shoddy marketing that streaming movies often get is Ron Howard's 13 Lives, which we reviewed, and much to both of our laments, but mostly Tucker's, has gone vastly underseen, vastly undermarketed. And what's interesting in doing a bit of research about this is that yes, this was intended for a peak of award season November 2022 release, but Amazon decided to move it back to August. Move it forward to August, and for
back in time.
for reasons unknown, it seems. No longer positioning it as an awards film, even though they were very confident in it, it seems. Very strange move on the part of old Jeffy B in the Amazon HQ.
Yeah. Oh, and I don't know if we'll ever really know what the reason is, but I like to focus on this film because it's not the most popular streaming film of the summer. Not even close. I'd say it's probably not in the top 20 or 30. But because the buzz around this film before its release was crazy. The only thing I really knew about it is the topic that it was about and that it had gotten some of the greatest reactions from test screenings of all time from whatever studio. And that it was Ron Howard, very prestigious director, that was positioned as a awards film, and it just got dumped with no fanfare. And now it's gone. I mean, this film has no second chance unless Amazon is able to push for it to get a fresh marketing campaign when that award season comes around. But they don't even have the statistics or the acclaim to sort of bolster that. If they're going into January or February, they can't say super high scores on Rotten Tomatoes. All these people watched it. You need to give it a chance for Oscars. Because no one did. Because they didn't market it. And that's very disappointing for me.
Yeah, I agree. Moving forward into coming forward into time. Now we moved back in time as did 13 Lives. Now moving forward in time to the most recent summer release that we'll be talking about right here is Bullet Train. And this was another bit of an interesting one. I guess this is really the movie that closed out the summer movie season in terms of being a success.
Success, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The last success of the summer movie
Yes,
season.
because as Tucker listed as the first mark here, the only August release to pass the $100 million mark at the box office.
Yes.
And
of course, this is unfortunately not $100 million at the domestic box office, which is what usually the century mark refers to. But in terms of global box office, this was the only one to pass it at all, not even domestically.
yeah, we have a very weak August, which we'll break down for you in just a little bit. But yeah, looking at the other things here, we got a middling Rotten Tomatoes score,
Yeah.
a solid cinema score as well, a solid IMDb rating. Not part of a franchise for David Leitch. He's breaking into something original here and is the third highest grossing film of his. But yeah, Tucker, what do you got to add about Bullet Train here?
Yeah, I think that what is unfortunate about this movie is that while it is the biggest success of this last month, that doesn't really mean too much for it.
No.
It cracked into that top 10. It did fine for itself, but considering the cast, considering the talent behind it, I mean, David Leitch is the one behind his most recent movies, Deadpool 2 and Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw, I believe it's called, officially. Both incredibly high grossing,
Yes.
very popular films, and now he's trying something of his own, and personally I think it worked. I think it's my favorite of his films. But no, didn't really hit the way it could have, and frankly I think should have, because it was highly budgeted. It's got that cast, and it would have been nice to see a lot more success in August, but this was such a soft month overall that this movie is still topping the charts. It's still picking up a lot of money, but only by comparison.
Yes. Maybe it was as the movie market, the movie going audience, sort of comes back to theaters. Maybe they were quick to burn out over the summer with some big earners like Top Gun Maverick, 2 MCU movies, things of that nature. Maybe by the time August rolled around, they were a little burned out in going to the movies. Not us though. We will never get tired of going to that movie theater, sitting our butts in those seats. But yeah, Bullet Train seems to be the one that closed out the summer movie season in terms of successes. But we do have some surprises in store as well here. Some smaller budget things that ended up doing quite well. Tucker, which one of these do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about the one that came out first, which was The Black Phone, released on a day that will live in my mind in infamy when The Black Phone, Elvis, and Marcel Ciel with Suzanne, which we're not talking about here, all released on the same day. And this movie is the success story of the summer, considering that it had a budget of $16 million. Impossibly low for a movie of this talent, featuring Ethan Hawke with Scott Derrickson from Blumhouse. All of these are big draws, and yeah, it paid off.
Yep.
$16 million budget with almost 10 times that in total box office is insane. And Godspeed to Scott Derrickson, Ethan Hawke, Jason Blum. You guys did something very impressive here, and it leaves it as the highest grossing horror movie of 2022, at least so far.
The movie that Scott Derrickson left Doctor Strange to work on, it seems.
True. Yeah.
And they opened just a couple weeks from each other, which is interesting there. And of course, we have at the other end of the screen here, Where the Crawdads Sing, which has...
which is really the surprise of the summer.
Yeah, which is really the surprise, which has proven itself to have some crawdaddy long legs, if you don't mind the bit of a pun work there.
I mind a little bit.
Consistently making a good chunk of change week after week here.
Yep.
I didn't see that. That's a really low Rotten Tomato score. Just
34 is crazy low.
That's very low. But yeah, a few interesting tidbits. This is the highest grossing female directed film of the year. We've gotten a fair number of those, most of them being streaming releases. Which is, hard to judge based off of box office numbers. We got some more coming in the award season, of course. And this comes from Reese Witherspoon's production company, Hello Sunshine.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll be getting some more mid-budget sort of thrillers that'll bring in audiences week after week, like Where the Crawdads Sing did.
Yeah. I certainly hope so, because this is really the only movie of its kind that was a success this summer. You can compare it to something like Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris or Mr. Malcolm's List, neither of which did well, neither of which even got a wide release. But this movie
Yeah.
continues to make money and has only been very recently surpassed and knocked out of that top 10 by Bullet Train,
Yeah.
just by a $2 million margin. This film made an $85 million domestic, and it would have been on that top 10 if it had not been for Bullet Train knocking it off. So good on you, Reese Witherspoon. I think that they made a great movie, and I'm interested to see sort of where this production company and Reese Witherspoon's creative direction goes next, because this is a kind of film we just simply do not get anymore. And especially ones like this don't get the success that Where the Crawdads Sing has.
Yes, maybe they need a Where the Crawdads Sing fan appreciation weekend to kick it back up into the box office rankings.
I'd say I'd go, but I probably wouldn't.
Okay. Well, Reese Witherspoon, that's an idea for you. I know that you're solely the one in charge of the marketing for this movie. Of course, we talked about a weak August when we were talking about Bullet Train, and that is displayed nowhere better than here on our really, really sad, really, really out with a whimper, as Tucker has listed it here, a terrible, measly August. Dragon Ball Superhero being the standout. I mean, one that did well. But even that, you had a strong opening weekend, but then has dropped off significantly in subsequent weeks. But Tucker, just look at some of these other titles here and their box office returns.
Yeah.
Really some sorry stuff. A sorry sight this August.
Here we've got the list of the top wide openings here for August. Of course, some of these movies still have some box office legs. The Invitation and Beast will continue to make money for at least another week or two. So we're not doing their box office grosses here, but just comparing their openings and soon comparing the openings to other August openings, not much brought anyone to theaters this month. I mean, it really was holdovers of Minions and Top Gun Maverick and Thor from months and months before, and Nope, that are keeping people in theaters. And each of these films underperforming their expectations, and even dismally so with things like Bodies, which is A24, a production house that is on a roll this year. And I think it was a great movie, but didn't hit with the box office. And the two most incredibly underperforming films of this year, 3,000 Years of Longing with a $60 million budget, two big name actors, and a big name director behind it, with an opening of not even $3 million. That is unheard of low. And even scarily lower, Mac and Rita, with barely over $1 million in opening, in like 1,000 plus theaters. That is terribly sad. I don't know if I've ever seen something that low before.
It's pitiful. It's really pitiful. I mean, you brought up 3,000 Years of Longing. We also have the other Idris Elba picture, Beast, with an 11.6.
This will be a notorious August for an actor having movies released back to back and both of them flopping.
Yeah, I wonder how this will affect his career. I mean, these are two films that are sold on either entirely him as a star or 50% him as a star. Yeah. And both,
looking at these posters,
both did very poorly. So hopefully it doesn't affect Idris Elba's star power too much.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it will. You know, if other schmucks in Hollywood can fail upward, maybe they can cut Idris Elba some slack. I think.
I hope so.
Yes. We do have comparisons to previous August just to prove that
rub
it is
salt
not
in the wound.
Yes, it is not a graveyard for films by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, just looking at August 2021, we had a superhero movie opening here, a very well received one that maybe did underperform.
Very much so.
Yeah, very much so. Another Idris Elba pick, by the way, The Suicide Squad, and some other titles as well. And we also compared it to August 2018. With Tucker's personal favorite, The Meg, topping the box office in that month.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is when you compare this August to pretty much any past August, Bullet Train is really the only film that is what you'd expect from an August release in terms of performance and reception. Something like Candyman, Free Guy, and The Suicide Squad are smashes in comparison to what we got here, and they're higher budget, they have more prestige name behind them, and they had better legs, and that's just what really makes it shine in a bad way. What the lineup here in August 2022 was. If you look down at the bottom here, we have actually added up the top 5 openings of each of these months, and you can see that at under 75 million for this past August, and then second on the ones we chose to compare, 100 million with August 2021 and August 2018, a much more normal comparison, 122 million. So this month isn't dead. The Meg had a great opening at almost 50 million. Crazy Rich Asians obviously stuck around much longer than any other movie on this list, I think, did. And yeah, so August is not inherently a bad month to release movies or to fail. But this was not an example of that.
No, it was not, of course. And maybe that was for weakness of titles. Maybe it was what I said earlier about, the recovering movie-going audience, maybe being a little burnt out, maybe not being hooked by these titles after being spoiled by things like Top Gun Maverick, 2
Absolutely.
MCU movies, Nope, even. But yeah, Tucker, do you have any wrapping up thoughts on the summer movie season before we take a little gander ahead into the future?
Yeah, here's the thing. We ended on a down note. This
We did.
August was categorically, I would say, at least for me, notoriously terrible, notoriously weak. And I'm going to meme it till the end of time. I'm going to be in my 60s like, boy, you guys remember August 2022? Man, what a weak
No, I don't, Grandpa.
month.
I wasn't alive.
What a weak month for movies. I promise you'll make that a bit. But I still had a lot of fun this summer. I think this was a great time. Very balanced summer movie season in terms of I got a lot of big budget films, some of the biggest budget films that I've seen that hit with me all the way. I got some that didn't hit with me all the way, but I got a lot of smaller movies not on here, like Marcel the Shell with Suzanne, like Brian and Charles, that I loved. And so I got something across the spectrum almost every week or every other week that entered my top films of the year, and even something like 13 Lives, which failed pretty terribly on the streaming service and will certainly not be an awards contender, hit very well for me. So box office, this was very up and down. However, on the whole, because we got a handful of movies that did do very well, Top Gun, Minions, both the MCU movies, this is not a failure of a summer movie season. It is better than last year, and that's really all we can ask for, honestly. Watching the movie Sphere, the box office, grow back after being basically killed off for 2020, this is what's to be expected. And I'm just happy that I got a solid list of movies, plenty of movies here that I've really, really enjoyed.
Yeah. It's not necessarily, I think, the rebound that the movie studios wanted, or maybe the theater industry wanted, the entire movie industry wanted, but it's one that they needed, I think, nonetheless. It was still a solid showing, not from every film, of course, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, and maybe there were more flops and more underperformers than you would have in a typical year, and maybe it'll shape up in the future, maybe it won't, maybe this is the new normal for the movie industry, and it'll have to adapt, but that's going to be something that we're going to have to figure out down the line as we do more of these monthly wrap-ups in the future.
Yeah.
But Tucker, we've decided to close out each of these monthly wrap-ups with a little, like I said, a little gander into the future, a little fun game, a little betting game, I guess, on what's going to perform how well in the coming month. So that would be September releases here. We have, up on screen right now, we have a collection of posters for September releases. Quite a few that I'm very excited to watch. Streaming releases, theatrical releases, some that are both. But what we've decided to do, Tucker, is pick our predicted top 5 box office performers, and I threw in a little extra twist of what we think their opening domestic weekend is going to be.
Yeah. I didn't do that.
Oh, okay.
So I won't be able to compete in that regard, but it'll be interesting to see how accurate you are. I'll plan for that in the future, thinking a little more, doing a little more research. But I spent 8 hours making graphics today.
Okay.
Tucker, I think I'm okay.
I'll let this one slide.
For effort here on Back Lot Banter. But I still did. I have a ranking. So we will be competing here, seeing who gets a little bit closer to this top 5. And what I'm going to say is we'll do a little game here with the little points.
Okay.
If your movie is on the list and it makes the top 5, you get a point. But if it's in the correct place on that list, you get 2 points. And if you predicted a movie that is not that on your list that does not make that top 5, you lose let's say half a point, and we'll
Okay.
see how this factors out.
Okay.
We'll do a little balancing in the future, maybe throw in a little extra wrench. But this is our first episode, so we're still working out the kinks.
So we're working at the kinks.
What's your
Let's
prediction?
let's start from number 5. How about that? Okay, number 5. For me, I was going back and forth on this one. I had 2 that I had in my mind, but I went with a little bit of wishful thinking here. So I went with Bros as my number 5 box office performer. I'm gonna predict that this has a $5 million opening.
Okay. I disagree, and I will get to why. But
Okay.
number 5 for me, I have The Woman King.
Okay. I can see that. Number 4 for me. Or do you want to talk about these as we break them down? Because The Woman King is on my list. We'll get to it eventually. But do you have any? Is Bros on your list, Tucker?
It is.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a little bit of sizzle then.
Let's just go through our list, and then we'll talk about it.
At number 4, I have Smile.
With number 4, I also have Smile.
Okay. I with a $6 million opening as my prediction. Number 4 for you, Smile as well. Okay. Number 3, Tucker. I have The Woman King.
Oh, you have The Woman King there. Okay.
With $9 million.
I've got Don't Worry, Darling.
Okay.
Number 3 slot.
Okay. Number 2, I have the Avatar re-release at $12 million opening.
Okay. Number 2 for me is Bros.
Wow. Okay. All right.
What did you have Avatar at?
$12 million.
Okay.
Yeah. And number 1, I have Don't Worry, Darling, with $15 million.
Okay. I've got the Avatar re-release at number 1, and
Okay.
frankly, I'm
Yeah.
surprised you don't.
It seemed neck and neck. I don't know. I kind of we can talk. We'll talk about this one right now. Here we go. I went back and forth. I just think that the audiences are going to, particularly people of our age demographic, are going to eat up this Don't Worry, Darling with Harry Styles, with Florence Pugh. I don't think the drama is going to impact the box office of this film at all. They're doing solid marketing push for this. It's gonna get people in seats more than I'd say. I think people are going to go see the Avatar release, but I think it's going to suffer a little bit. They did take this off of Disney Plus, but I don't know if that's going to incentivize people the way they think it will. I think that some people will be like, I don't need to go see Avatar in theaters. There'll be a good chunk of people who are like, I don't need to go see Avatar in theaters again. I saw it X number of years ago. I remember it. And there might even be some people who are like, I don't need to go see Avatar in theaters. They have it on Disney Plus and won't check.
Yeah.
I think that's also a possibility.
Well, that's a very specific scenario, and not one that I think would take away from it. And the reason that I have Avatar at number 1, and frankly, I think it's going to win pretty heartily, is that this is the only 4-quadrant movie, quote unquote, releasing in theaters this month. And not only is it the only 4-quadrant movie releasing in theaters, it will be the only 4-quadrant movie releasing in theaters in almost 2 months.
Yeah.
So when people are itching to go back to the theater to see a movie, and they see that Avatar is showing and that it's been remade, and they're like, oh, the new movie is coming out, I think that this is going to be pushed in the coming weeks and handily surpass everything else, because it's the only one that frankly appeals to everyone, that fits that box office niche of an action movie, of something with scope and scale and spectacle. Nothing else here appeals to everyone. I think almost everything else here, except for Bros, which for me I put at number 2, because I think it's the one being a comedy that appeals to the most people otherwise.
Yeah. Tucker, here's my last note on the Avatar re-release. For my prediction here, I looked at the performance of the No Way Home re-release.
Sure. Okay.
Which is a film that did obviously not as well as Avatar, and it only came out a couple months, very, very recently comparatively to Avatar, of course. But it didn't draw a lot of people out, and I'm not sure if general audiences are all about this, like going to a theater to see a movie that they've seen already.
Yeah.
That's why I placed it Avatar at number 2, obviously at the number 2 slot, just under Don't Worry, Darling. But yeah, is there any other ones on our top 5 you want to talk about? Smile, The Woman King, Bros, anything like that?
I think what's interesting about predicting this month is that we've included the Avatar re-release. But frankly, if we didn't include the Avatar re-release, I really don't even know what I would put in that last slot. Maybe a Barbarian.
Because
Because
I'd go Pearl. I think.
okay,
Yeah.
well, X did not do well at the
No.
box office,
No.
and Pearl has not been getting theatrical trailers as far as I
Oh,
know.
yeah.
Barbarian has been for not very
Barbarian,
long, but
yeah.
for a little bit. But what I was saying is, Avatar re-release for me is easily the only thing that I see pulling people back to theaters,
Yeah.
just in general, because everything else here is kind of on the same scale. Nothing is going to be clear outliers. Nothing's clear number one for its week or for this month. So that's what makes this really interesting. I mean, we've got a mid-budget, not franchise horror movie and horror movies do well comparatively to their budgets, and so I think it'll crack into the top 5. But I really don't know. That's what it's really fun that we're starting this now because there's nothing to really land on here.
I think that Don't Worry, Darling is more of a safe bet, more of a safe box office bet than you might think it is.
Could be.
I think. I mean, you are getting one of one of your headliners is like one of the biggest male pop stars of the moment right now. You also have Florence Pugh, who was a huge actress even before she joined the MCU, and is now coming with a dramatic turn in this. Again, a solid marketing push, very intriguing trailers, I think, for a general audience. I think it's going to perform very well, and that's why I have it at number 1.
But we will see. We've got another month to wait.
Yes.
But honestly, I'm itching to have this
Me
month
too.
over, to look back at what happened, and continue our foray into Back Lot Banter as we do one of these, hopefully, every month going forward. We're going to be waiting a little bit into the month, as is uploading the Sunday after the month ends, to give that last bit of films at least a full week in theaters so we can sort of see how they're doing. But thank you very much for joining us on this inaugural and probably much longer episode of Back Lot Banter. It has been a pleasure to work on this. This is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm excited to see how this grows. If you have any suggestions on what kind of statistics you'd like to see, on things that we've flubbed here, some kind of layout that it's not looking quite right, please let me know. I'm very open to criticism here, to constructive criticism, hopefully. And we'll see you guys next month.
Yeah.